Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to be introducing the speakers today. The instructor of the course is unfortunately sick, but nevertheless, I'm very excited to introduce our fifth set of speakers for the argument series, Cyan Cheng and Chen Zhan, who will present their project, How Much Wattage is One Handbreadth of Water? And I love the word handbreadth. That you excavated from kind of rural practices of counting. This project is one piece of an ongoing research endeavor that both of them have been working on, entitled Tracing Sand, and it came together through an open call at the Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York, where they just had an exhibition happening this year. It is also our first series of speakers that are collaborating on a project, and we can hear about how they came together and their collaboration endeavors. And their work is very important because it brings together many different and disparate terrains of knowledge, including the dynamics of resource extraction and the impact of industrial processes on local environments and global networks. They are also engaged very intensively with field work, describing their work as an intersection of architecture, anthropology, and film. So we can also discuss with them what is field work in architecture and how it can get translated or transposed to a realm of engagement with architectural discourse. And they're trained architects. They have been working together for the past few years through research, exhibition, and film. Particularly, Cyan holds a PhD in design from the Architectural Association in London, and she has taught at the AA before beginning her current position at the Royal College of Art. Chen is a registered architect in the UK, where she has practiced with a number of firms, including Heatherwick Studios, before studying anthropology at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Cyan and Chen began their collaboration through a series of experiential films. One such film was titled Orchid Bee and I, wonderful title. And it is a short film about one day produced as a reflection during the pandemic. And there are other films, Rippling, that have come together over the course of visits, research collaboration, and travels. Their films have received a number of awards, including the Milan Architecture Film Festival and the Venice Architecture Film Festival. How much wattage is one handbreadth of water? Which we discussed in our sections, is part of the new research project Tracing Sand, and this has been supported by the Harvard Graduate School of Design Wheelwright Prize, which is a very important prize of $100K, and it's also more recently supported by the Canadian Centre for Architecture's multi-year project in the Hurricane on the Land, which brings together architects to think about what constitutes land-based fieldwork. The exhibition that we have as the kind of theme of our discussion today brings together how different sites and lives along an entire region are transformed, on the one hand by the construction of new land, and on the other with the integration of large-scale infrastructural project and how that becomes entangled with the displacement of indigenous population and their lives. Cyan and Chen start by attempting to trace sand, a ubiquitous material in construction, through changes to the ground and their interconnections with the river that flows through, and it is seen as a source of power. They mark the infrastructure's numerous subjects, the multiple tangible temporalities of life of such an infrastructure, from the diminishing water levels and the now water-based Karen peoples to the tidal currents of the sand barge family in Thailand, to the elimination of this kind of temporal register for viewers to the infinite waterfall in Changi Airport in Singapore, which is very well known. The scenarios and episodes that they select and share ask how such an infrastructure both unites and divides, how power generation registers locally and regionally. For us, their work adds to our ongoing conversation, not only arguments on how architects can think about construction materials and infrastructure subjects, but also on different methods of engagement, from an exhibition, a film, what it means to do field work, and what one encounters in practice and conversation in construction, and what constitutes a field itself. Also, what is the kind of traveling thread of different materials, since, as they argue, they all come from the earth. After their presentations, we're going to be joined in the conversation by Gradient Studio, who are teaching a summer studio, your professors, Amaya Sanchez Velasco and Jorge Valiente Oriol. And we're also going to be joined by two students from Irina Chernyakova's argument section, Jiaiwen Li and Mihika Pawar. Please join me in welcoming Cyan and Chen. Thank you.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Cyan, and this is Chen. Well, just to say, we are so happy to be here. We always feel actually a special affinity with the program, having many friends, colleagues, and thought partners who either teaching AAD studios or contributing to the argument series. So somehow this is definitely our first time standing here, but there's a weird feeling of coming home. So we call ourselves recovering architects. It started as a joke between us. When I was still working as a researcher in the university full-time, and Chen was practicing architect in London. And actually the last project Chen worked on as a practicing architect is the Changi Airport Terminal 5. And its construction started a month ago, and you will hear a lot about it later in the talk. But then what happened to us is we both quit our jobs, and that's why we call ourselves recovering architects, and we started working together instead. So we built buildings, picking apart sites, tracing elements back to land and water, and following drifting bodies. By drifting bodies, we mean sand, water, and people. And we are becoming drifting bodies ourselves along the way. But the more we get on the road, get into the field, the more we realize it's not really a research project. It's a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage of two recovering architects trying to reconnect with the fundamental elements of our surroundings. So if we just look around, like here in this auditorium, the walls, the concrete foundations, the lime mortar on the wall, the glasses, they're all made from sand and derived from rivers and lands in one way or another. So architecture comes from the earth in one way or another. The structure of the talk, we will start from laying out the basic questions that we're going after and focus on how we are getting on with them. We will articulate what field practice does through telling stories from the field, stories of sorting earth, peeling glass, and stories of one handbreadth of water. And accounting for all these encounters, we put forward a notion of hydroelectric accessibility. And then we'll end with some more stories, report. Our starting point is sand. What about sand? Sand is such a ubiquitous, humble material, but it has a fundamental role in the built environment and human communities. So sand is a key component of concrete, glass, asphalt roads, and artificial land, supporting modern cities and modern life. So sand really affects each and every one of us. However, by dredging underwater systems, sand mining erodes riverbanks and disrupts ecosystems. So colossal amounts of sand are mined and moved to shape one habitat while destroying another. So we follow sand, follow its sourcing and consumption, follow the different forms it takes, as well as the lives entangled in these processes. And all this is just to ask a simple question: what it means to build, and what it means to build today at a time of intensified social inequality and ecological crisis. On the reclaimed land made of sand stands Changi Airport, and this is where architecture happens. This is the Jewel. It's a retail and entertainment complex nested at the heart of the Changi, and Changi is Southeast Asia's busiest air hub. It seamlessly connects to all its terminals. And then the Jewel has indeed become a model for airports around the world, if you have seen waterfalls popping up here and there. So beneath a vast glass dome, this retail complex houses the world's largest indoor waterfall, set within a tariffed forest environment. And this celebrated architecture is where consumerism, reproduction of nature, and hyperconnectivity are materialized. And the landing into this world housed by the Jewel, it really embodies the smoothness and the comfort promised by modernity, therefore making it a quintessential icon of the contemporary energy-intensive lifestyle. And the waterfall was modeled in the design phase as accurately as possible. So it is actually the understanding of its physics and the airflow that informed the terminal's spatial organization. So if the climatic element, the air, water, temperature, become the primary elements of design based on computational modeling and stimulation, all of these are heightened in the glass dome, also made of sand. The glass dome appears to be open, transparent, and airy, yet it is a sealed sphere of precisely controlled indoor climate that rules out any inconvenient natural features. So under the glass dome lies a new environmental paradigm that is enormous capital, abundant energy, and highly advanced technology. All of this mobilized through an architectural form to produce an incredible image of a quasi-intimacy with nature, prioritizing human comfort. Prioritizing human comfort means the visitor level here is actually a bit too cold for the local tropical plants, for the plants here are sourced globally. And let's go back to where architecture happens. The sand that forms almost a quarter of Singapore's territory comes from mining in Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, among others. So this timeline really lays bare the massive terraforming of Singapore over decades. Despite official bans, illegal sand trade has been ongoing, as identified by the UN. And this is the condition zero for the Changi Airport and the Jewel. So the parallel reality is the crumbling ground beneath communities who live in the lower Mekong River basin, as already widely covered by media. The Mekong Delta is shrinking and sinking. Riverbanks collapse into water, taking with them the livelihoods of Vietnamese people, their houses, roads, and rice fields, and disturbing habitats of mangroves, fishes, and migratory birds. But a note here, this is a very broad stroke for the sake of framing. There are a lot of nuance and contradiction beneath such narrative, but let's stick to it for now. the flow of passengers and goods in Changi entangles the flow of sand, and sand, and sand. The flow of sand entangles the displacement of human and more than human communities in the Mekong. And here, if we reverse it, it's actually interesting to see what is captured by satellite imaging and what it means, the reality on the ground. But far more than just a source of sand, the Mekong River Basin as an ecosystem has nurtured a wealth of conditions of living with temporalities of water and unstable ground, such as the Khmer community nurturing mangroves at the edge of the Vietnamese Mekong Delta, and floating villages spread across Mekong's waterway alongside a massive fish population that migrates to the far reaches of the river. These floating villages are home to migrant communities whose status and national identities are perpetually adrift. Traveling upstream along the Mekong, northeast Thailand sees riverside agriculture that works with the appearing and disappearing of the lower river bank. At the same time, shifting islands on the Mekong makes shifting borders between Thailand and Laos. So here we were standing on a sand ridge just beneath the water surface, and then feeling the sand moving under our feet, it just raised all the questions about the so-called national border and the territory. And further up, approaching the headwater of Mekong in China, the tension is high on hydropower dams, and there the watershed becomes powershed. And now let's make a jump to beach. The beach is an engineered infrastructure built for profit. The city of Miami Beach was built on infilled swamplands out of massive dredging and filling operations about a century ago. Concealing its real relation to nature and history, the beach is just as known place as the airport. There's no beach in Miami Beach without artificially transporting sand from elsewhere and then building it. The beach is really an infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt every 3 to 5 years, known as beach nourishment. So the beach is just as artificial as the hotels that surround it. And the sugary white sand that matches the imagination of sun and sea comes from inland mines, because the sand needs to be sorted to a uniform standard. And running out of domestic sand, there are pending proposals to import sand from the Bahamas to sustain the beach-based lifestyle and beach-based economy. And sand is running out globally. Yet ironically, Greenland sees a growing sand reserve due to its melting glaciers. And the melting glaciers contribute to sea level rise, and sea level rise is an exacerbating threat to areas with riverbank and coastal erosion, such as the Mekong Delta, such as Singaporean coastline and Miami Beach, basically all the places we just touched on. So now we come to this overview. It just spells out how the built environment draws surprising connections between sites, communities, and ecologies. And to understand how interconnected and interdependent we all are, it's just so fundamental today. But it can be very easily beyond comprehension, because the interconnections bring together the large and the small, the near and the far, the fast and the slow, the weak and the strong, making a mess of stable categories and defying any boundary making. So for us, architectural materiality becomes a navigation guide, a material lens into this messy entanglement. So it's kind of an architecture method of material wayfinding. Then return to this basic question, what it means to build today. Have you gone through the thread of airport and the beach? You probably realize that we take aim at iconic sites and to dissect the materialization and form of contemporary energy-intensive way of life. So to dissect the iconic sites, if to review the entangled flows of people, life forms, matter, and the built environment, both near and far, connected by supply chains and ecosystems. This means to reframe the materiality of architecture as an active, tangible force, driving and shaping long chains of consequences and dependencies. Not only to interrogate from where and how it is sourced, distributed, constructed, consumed, maintained, and regulated, but also to understand how design decisions that architects make in offices, in studios, bring about all these material flows, as well as energetic and economic flows. This also means to unsettle the question of the site. If we really recognize the interconnectedness in the production of architecture, then no site belongs to one place. Then with all this in mind, this framework could be understood as a proposition for architecture to build if to bring territories and bodies into relations in flux, spontaneously charged with accountability and affinity. But let's take a small pause here. We've just gone through a kind of planetary entanglement via architectural materiality. And questions of this kind are really complex and difficult to grasp. Amitav Ghosh articulated this challenge really well. In his words, to break problems into smaller and smaller puzzles until a solution presented itself. This is a way of thinking that deliberately excludes things and forces, i.e. externalities, that lie beyond the horizon of the matter at hand. So it is a perspective that renders the interconnectedness of Gaia unthinkable. So then how might we get on with it? We're attempting it through field work, getting into the field. So then the key question becomes how to learn and practice entanglement empirically. So especially important for us is to understand these connections not in the abstract, but through tangible, specific registers and embodied experiences. And this could be understood as field practice.
Okay, so now with all the framing, let's get into the field, and I'll share some of our field encounters in Southeast Asia. Now we are on the sand barge on Chao Phraya River in Thailand. Loaded with sand, several barges linked in a chain are towed up and down by a small tugboat. It's quite common to run this as a family business in the region. This family, including their son, has been living on the sand barge for 30 years, and now it's their 4th generation. They're more at home on water than on land. And when they invited us on board, they called this little cabin their house. In the cabin house, both the clock and the calendar are out of sync with the time we are accustomed to, because tidal currents are far more important reference for them than any clock or calendar. Here in this little cabin, there is a clash in different temporal coordinates in life. Their life drifts back and forth slowly between sand piers on the Chao Phraya River, transporting sand dredged in the Anton province to Bangkok. Having repeated this for 3 decades, the uncle asks, everyone has been dredging this much sand every day, but how come Bangkok still hasn't been filled? Transporting sand by barges along the river is only a fragment of the sand supply chain. Following the barge and the tugboat, we arrived at the piers where sand is loaded, and from there we traced where sand is dredged. Sand here is being directly dug out from rice field following the river dredging ban. and this land mainly supplies sand for Bangkok. We're looking at a new mining spot here, where excavators have just broken the ground. The digging marks are still very fresh, making scars on the earth. Digging, 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 until an artificial pond is formed and sand beneath the soil becomes extractable. Sediments at the bottom of the pond are being sucked up by dredging boats, and through the pipes they reach the sorting station. Here, sediments are being sorted into 3 categories. That is soil, landfill sand, and construction sand. The land-based sand mining is literally about digging the earth and sorting it into different components based on human needs. On that day, there's no shade on the fractured land. Beneath the scorching sun, we watch as through digging and sorting, the earth is transformed into a commodity. Post-mining, if in a very good location, sometimes the site can be sold to developers to build luxury villas. The sand mining pond would become a landscape feature. So even the holes of extraction with the absence of sand and soil are to be commodified. On the Mekong River, site like this is just one of many dredging sites along the waterway. Be that digging from land or dredging from the river, all point to the extractive logic. That is to take matter out of its life rod to be sorted, calculated, commodified, and circulated. In other words, to be turned into resources. The sound of sand cascading in the steel structure, forming a mound that grows slowly but steadily. It resonates like a pulse from the earth, low but powerful. Its vibration stirs something within the body, like a rhythmic hum, as we listen to it throughout the day. Extraction is no longer an abstract idea for us. It's the hum of sand cascading from the steel structure. It's the vibration registered in our bodies. At that moment, extraction becomes a bodily sensation. Sediments from the Mekong River are separated on sorting belts into sand mounds and pebble mounds. On the pebble mounds, female pickers are busy hand-picking the large white stones, which can be used in gardens, yards, and landscaping projects, and therefore at a higher price. These pickers continue until every white pebble is separated and bagged in neat rolls. Material processes are deeply entangled with the lives of people, like these female pickers, and like the Thai family living on sand barge for 3 decades. Now let's look at another kind of mound and another kind of sorting. This is a glass recycling yard in Guangdong province in China, and this is where the architectural glass panels ended up after their life in buildings. The left pile are glasses from solar panel, which looks almost white because of its low iron ingredients. And the middle pile is standard low iron glass in architecture for ultra clear windows. And the right pile is ordinary normal glass, which is a little bit green because of the iron contents in it. So the glass recycling process mirrors the act of sorting as the very beginning of glass production to sort sand from the river or land. And here We also see a very manual process of literally peeling apart layers of glass by hand for recycling. In the recycling yard, we see gloves here and there. And they reminded us once again, all the people entangled in the material processes. Laminated glass is known for better safety performance when it breaks. This means two pieces of glass are bonded at high temperature by a glue-like interlayer. And here we are looking at these interlayer sheets peeled off from glasses by hand because they cannot be recycled in the same way as pure glasses. And this interlayer is just this very thin line here in an architectural drawing. The properties of glass panel can be constructed by adding complicated layers of coatings, air gaps, and sealants to fulfill performance requirements of aesthetics, safety, light transmittance, solar control, acoustic, insulation, durability, and so on. Therefore, architectural glass is a highly engineered composite material to achieve precise control of light and heat, among other things. As a case in point, all this performance spec we are looking at here derived from the needs of an enormous glass dome at the Jewel Changi Airport in Singapore, which houses the terraced forest and the indoor waterfall, as well as providing comfort for humans. This is the design intent usually discussed in architectural offices, and it is realized through writing specifications to define glass panel build-ups. But what we, as architects, normally we don't talk about is the material reality of these specifications in its afterlife. Here we return to the glass recycling yards, witnessing how laminated glass complicates the recycling processes. So this is just a fragment of our ongoing trip, and the glass tracing work is still ongoing as we continue. In between sorting earth and peeling glass, we hope to show here how our field-based practice takes matter as guide. To trace sand is, on the one hand, to recontextualize and re-embed matter back into the life worlds they are from, and on the other, to follow through what an architectural detail really entails. In this way, we seek to confront processes of alienation and externalization to reveal and indeed affirm the interconnectedness that is always there.
Okay, another field story. How much wattage is 1 handbreadth of water? 1 handbreadth, like this, is how much the water level drops daily in Thailand's Vajiralongkorn Dam reservoir when the dam releases water to generate electricity. This dam reservoir is inhabited. Communities living inside the reservoir have built a life on rafts, floating with the water. The 1 handbreadth water level change is not quite perceptible daily, but when it accumulates every day over a year, the water level difference can reach as much as 20 meters, 65 feet in depth. As such, houses on rafts can bob over 200 meters, roughly 656 feet, in a year's time. The people living on rafts are Karen Hill tribe, an indigenous community known as the nomadic forest dweller. The original forest home to Karen Hill tribe had been largely cut down prior to the dam construction. In that summer, 40 years ago, the dam started filling water. Whatever was left of the forest has been submerged, and mountain tops became islands. The Karen people were forced to relocate from the forest to rafts, and some of them now float above their submerged houses. Living on rafts means to live with the water pores, the waterfalls of dry and rainy seasons, and the waterfalls of generating electricity. But electricity is difficult to store. Its supply, the dam operation, responds to real-time consumption data. So the dam's water release is actually very sensitive to production activity and daily routines of residents. As the Thai dam operator told us, the dam knows when you have dinner. And very importantly, electricity supply works in the logic of a grid, not in a linear point of supply to point of demand manner. It is a central grid that takes in all the power generated to then distribute it. So for a variety of reasons beyond simply balancing a supply and demand, Thailand takes in hydropower from Laos. And here, this newly completed Saraburi Dam on the Mekong River in Laos exports 95% of its generated electricity to Thailand's national grid. And also dams under construction on the Mekong River are part of this transnational power grid in Southeast Asia. This grid is known as the Lao PDR Thailand Malaysia Singapore Power Integration Project, which commenced in 2022. This transnational infrastructure is an important pilot that allows Singapore to import renewable hydropower from its neighbors. So follow this electricity supply. Arriving in Singapore, we arrive at the Changi Airport, arriving at this waterfall in the tube. We were transfixed by this sense of being extremely close to a waterfall, that you can touch it, yet without getting wet, without hearing a sound. For the usual multiple sensory cues of a waterfall, the raw, the mist, the moisture are all gone. All that remains is the visual. And it's an astonishing sensation of quasi-intimacy with nature. And standing in front of this tame and silent waterfalls, we just couldn't help but think of the energy it takes to pump the water from beneath the ground to the top of the dome, which runs 11 to 12 hours a day and 365 days a year, with the exception of maintenance. And we thought of where the energy might come from, of the dams in Laos, in Thailand, of the people who float with the waterfalls in the dam reservoir, and of that one handbreadth of water level change. And experiencing this tamed waterfall stands just in such contrast to our experience of the dam reservoir. Falling asleep and waking up on a vast water surface really arouses bodily sensation. We can feel every movement, the waves, wind, birds, boats, and sometimes even fish passing below. And when walking on the raft, every step triggers a series of movements and sounds. So there's very strong awareness of sharing this place and moments with many other beings. It's also a learning experience, learning how to be a tiny part of our surroundings, learning to be a pebble joining the ripples, learning not to be a big stone. And we are gradually learning this humbling, decentering perspective from the forest tradition, a branch of Thai Buddhism. Organized in a national network of temples, each branch bonds with its local community, and together they nurture the forest on their land. So in Thailand, we've been traveling with the Jewel Buba, who have been practicing forest tradition for years. And we are very fortunate to meet and also be accepted by abodes across places. And thanks to their generous support and mediation, we have been able to access local communities and landscapes. And in this context, our encounter with the Karen Hill tribe was guided by the abbot who has resided in a single-person temple in the middle of the reservoir for 15 years. So our field-based approach finds surprising affinity with the practices of the forest tradition. In their teaching, forest is a setting that opens up senses, and being in a forest is learning through practice. The forest is everywhere. It is an attitude rather than attribute. And this just spells out what field practice means to us.
Exhibition is an important forum for us to share and communicate and activate the sensibilities that we are learning from the field. So earlier this year, we opened a solo show at Storefront here in New York, where we're centering on the field story of energy and water we just shared. The exhibition has two parts. The first is the 4-channel video installation that brings together the two distinct bodies of water. The spatial relationship between a public front and hidden black box collapsed the long transnational distance between these two technically mediated natures. Starting with a soft projection of the Jewel waterfall, we invited visitors to confront this spectacle, to break it, literally walking into it, then to enter the sensorial environment of Thailand's Vajiralongkorn Dam Reservoir. This act of breaking through is important for us. Here we hope to instigate a new legibility as an experience for visitors to enter the underlying world that the celebrated image of the Jewel waterfall depends on. We also have to note that there is something you can only experience in the space, such as the position of the 3 screens and the seating actually prevents an overview. Visitors have to move their heads following sonic cues. There is a sensory disjunction where sound leads and vision lags or never catches up. It's the kind of perceptual engagement we experienced in the reservoir, where listening rather than sight drives the experience. The video installation captures 2 points in a complex network. Then the second part of the exhibition focuses on making the infrastructural connection more tangible. So we created an electric soundscape to do so. The sound you're hearing is a live audio feedback mediated by aluminium bar, because aluminium is a key material for conductivity in transmission lines. When we were in the deep mountains in Laos, standing beneath the high voltage transmission lines, we can barely see them apart from the marker balls. With the sound of wind and birds, there was a strange hum in the air, not a literal one, but a bodily awareness of our embeddedness in the systems. The sound instrument didn't replicate that moment, say through recordings. Instead, we designed this feedback system to make aluminium and electricity to speak for themselves. And in dialogue with the eerie silence of the Jewel waterfall, as well as the vibrant, layered, sonic environment of the dam reservoir behind the waterfall. With all this, we are attempting a new sense, or maybe it's a proposition. We call it hydroelectric sensibility, through which one is able to see electricity through the physical movement of the floating rafts, see the dam as a hypersensitive megabeam, and hear the humming of the transnational power grid. This notion, hydroelectric sensibility, directly comes from doing things on the ground rather than the other way around. Usually a theoretical concept precedes and guides practice. This is what we mean by practice-based.
And the ongoing development of this field story is, of course, to bring it back to its own context, to Singapore, Bangkok, and the Dam Reservoir. And Bangkok is quite important here because it's actually the biggest consumer of electricity directly from Vajradharana Dam. And responding to this, we are working on a building scale sound installation. The ideal scenario is to coincide with a version of the work in the Singapore Biennial later this year and the utilitarian components in the reservoir for the Karen people. So the correspondence between Bangkok, Singapore, and the Dam Reservoir is a territorial statement that amplifies the infrastructure connections revealed by the work. So this correspondence is the real project here. So in Bangkok, we are working with this formal factory building at a semi-ruined state. This is all work in progress. And the principle is just to work with invisibility through sound to reveal infrastructural and elemental connections, that is electricity and wind. So we are looking into transforming the abandoned goods shaft from ground floor to rooftop into an organ pipe of the building, so that the building itself becoming an organ pipe of the underlying energy infrastructure. And there's something beautiful about turning the whole building into a sonic device. It gives the space to activate a bodily sensation of our embeddedness in the systems, while also gives space for others to imagine their own relation to it. The question we keep returning to is, how do we relate to infrastructure, to these massive yet invisible beings, those our lives really depend on, but far, far away? Those things that lie at the edge of the perception, something you know is there, but just cannot grasp it, like a spectre. And for the Karen people, since our fieldwork has been mediated by the Forest Tradition Network, we're in conversation with them to learn about what is really needed there, likely in the form of an offering. We feel this is the most appropriate way to do it, and we are mindful that not to impose any ideas, even with good intention. But just to give you a sense, very ironically, even though living inside the reservoir, the Karen people don't have access to the electricity generated from the dam. And they rely on solar panels and arrange their daily activity in accordance with the sun. So this is something we could do if that's what they need. So the tracing, the travel is still ongoing. And in the past 2 years, we've traveled in the reversed way upwards from the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, where the river enters the sea, to its headwater in China that originates from the Himalayas. So sand has been a pretty good guide, taking us through the Mekong River Basin and by extension to Singapore. But at one point during our fieldwork, it struck us that what we're doing is not really about sand, but about enacting a perspective enabled by sand. Sand reminds us that the planetary is grounded and specific after all. So rather than an investigation of direct causality, tracing sand is to trace entangled relations, to grasp the planetary interconnectedness through fieldwork. That's field practice. And just thinking about what we've learned, first and foremost, getting out there, getting into the field, it's essential. It's essential to break away from the usual setting and mindset, be that institutions or architectural offices, and really be on the ground or in the water to learn what land and the river have to teach us, and to learn from the people whose lives are deeply entangled in the material processes and energy networks. So field practice is about situating knowledge, about learning and practicing new sensibilities.
Another pause here. We have a lot more stories to share from our field work along the Mekong. But here we'd like to use the last few minutes of the talk to share briefly another project and to show different ways of activating field practice. The project is called Rippling. We've been working with Shigushan village at the outskirts of Wuhan in China since 2015, so roughly 10 years now. And villagers there are part of China's almost 300 million rural migrant workers. In the summer of 2023, we organized a screenback event in the village. Through a film installation, we shared with the community how their daily lives and all kinds of improvisations we had been working with them are featured on screens. This collective happening took place in the village's abandoned People's Communal Hall, which is an iconic site for large-scale political gathering during China's People's Commune period in the 1970s. The screening event turned the Commune Hall from a political site into a theater of everyday life, and almost the entire village came, and they loved it. And for us, among all recognitions, this is the most important one for us. And while this is in the village, last year we brought the project to London, a very different context, to Architectural Association, where the idea of the project was originated. Once again, we took the opportunity of the exhibition to activate the research. There, we built a 1-to-1 scale foundation of a village house on Bedford Square in central London with 24 tons of dry stones. Dry stone became a material register that connects London with Shigushan village in China. For that, dry stone walling is a traditional construction technique in both Shigushan and the British countryside. In the British tradition, dry stones are collected by farmers from the field to build walls, usually for marking boundaries, while in Shigushan they are used for house foundations or yards that actually diffuse social spatial boundaries. The left video captures the spontaneous deconstruction and recycling of old dry stone houses to build new ones in Shigushan village. House foundation there is a very fluid thing, and over the years, it could become a kitchen garden, could be a children's playground, or a house, or an abandoned site. The right video is our construction process in London with dry stone masters, architects, and a group of students. It was a tremendous collective effort, taking days to build it and really take a village. The house foundation on the square became a statement piece on the privately owned public square in London. This dry stone foundation was also a temporary assemblage of materials coming from the earth. That's the purbeck stones, sand, soil, wood chips, recycled glass aggregates, hemp blocks, and herbal plants. The foundation was actually a very popular lunch spot for humans, and birds usually came after people left. Then in the afternoon, it's a popular space for children's as their playground after school. And the nighttime seems to be favored by foxes, leaving paw prints on the sand. When it reaches the time limit of planning permission, which is 28 days in London for public installation, we invited a food artist, Bonnie, to prepare a beautiful edible farewell to the dry stone foundation. It was a very poetic and fermented goodbye infused with autumn earthy flavors. And the fairware couldn't be completed without our foundation regulars, who is still busy hiding peanuts in the soil in our little garden on the very last day. And also towards the very end of it, we organized a dry stone deconstruction workshop. When talking about circular economy or material flows, it usually comes down to very concrete things like very patiently, almost like painstakingly disassembling, sorting, and packing. But actually, dry stone wallers, they learn how to build by deconstructing historical walls. So during the workshop, stones were removed from the foundation piece by piece, sorted according to different sizes, then reassembled in the bags. As one of the waller put it beautifully, those columns standing in the bags are seeds of knowledge transfer. This temporary material assemblage in the form of a house foundation had all gone on their next journey. The stones were returned to the quarry in Dorset, the plant-based blocks and recycled glass foam aggregates taken to their next building projects, wood chips and soil taken to another pavilion project, sand to a community garden, and the potted plants were brought home by workshop participants.
So last part, back to the opening day. Back to the opening day, this is a duration performance. And we're looking at it speed up by 2,500 times of real life. So our collaborator, Meng Fan, she's a choreographer. She's walking from the end of one room to another. And she carries with her the elderly female bodies from Shigushan village and relays through her own younger body. And through that 3-hour performance, a much slower temporal dimension was injected quietly but persistently into a very busy public space in central London. It messed up the most usual things, like walking on the streets, like a taxi driver stop of half an hour. It disrupted common sense. So the RIBA project is another way of doing field practice. Getting into the fields is to enter into relations with people, matter, land, river. And in RIBA, through filming with the villagers, improvising together and screening back to them, we've changed certain dimensions of the relations we initially entered into, while a temporary dry stone foundation in London is another propositional act. And along this line, trying to do something for the Karen people in the dam reservoir is also how we intervene into relations. In this sense, field practice is propositional. It is fundamentally process-driven and without a fixed form of its interventions. So just to repeat, field practice is about situating knowledge, about learning and practicing new sensibilities. On sensibilities, the ability to sense. It's just really an important, crucial skill. I would say life school skill in the present times for reckoning and unlearning the methods and assumptions of colonial modernity. Sensibility is more than awareness, more than the intellectual understanding of things, such as questions of interconnectedness, but an effective bodily grasp of things that changes the way one thinks, understands, sees, and does other things. So we share and activate such sensibilities through exhibitions and in educational settings like this, and at its best, towards shaping alternative common sense. That's all from us today. Thank you.